This is our first tutorial or recitation on magnetic circuits. What is inductance? When a current flows, it creates a flux linkage. When a current flows through a coil, it creates a magnetic flux that links each one of the turns of that coil, creating flux linkage. That flux linkage, lambda, is defined as n times the flux, is the product of the number of turns linked by the flux that links it. The units are Webers. The inductance tells us how many flux linkage Webers are created by every amp that flows through that coil. 1 Henry is 1 Weber per amp. If the inductance of a coil is 20 millihenries, that means that every ampere flowing through the coil creates 20 milliwebers of flux linkage. So the number of turns multiplied by the flux that links those turns is a flux linkage, right? Lambda is n multiplied by 5 Webers, Webers and Webers. But what happens if the flux does not link all the n turns? How can we compute the flux linkage then? As in this case. In this case, 3 lines of flux are linking 5 turns. But 2 of those flux lines are linking only 3 of the turns. How can we compute the flux linkage? Like this. We say, 2 lines of flux link 3 turns, and 3 lines of flux link 5 turns. The total flux linkage is 21 Maxwell turns, but you know that turns is no unit. That is the flux linkage in this case, 21 Maxwells. The meaning of parameters, the resistance of a device, tells us, according to that definition, how many volts we need to apply to the device to drive 1 amp of current through the device. The capacitance of a device, according to that expression, is telling us how many coulombs we need to push into the device to raise its voltage by 1 volt. And the inductance? Or the inductance of a device tells us how many Webers of flux linkage are created by each amp that flows through that device. Proportionality coefficients, that's what they are. The resistance is a proportionality coefficient. It shows that the voltage is proportional to the current. The capacitance is also a proportionality coefficient. It tells us that the stored charge in the capacitor is proportional to the voltage in the capacitor. And the inductance is a proportionality coefficient that tells us that the flux linkage is proportional to the current flowing through the device. We know the flux in the circuit, 20 microwebers. We also know the number of turns, 3,000. And finally, we have calculated the current in the coil as 0.3 amperes. What is the inductance of that coil? Let's proceed. First, we compute the flux linkage. N times 5, 3,000 turns multiplied by 20 microwebers, that is 60 milliwebers of flux linkage. And next we divide the flux linkage by the current, 0.3 amperes, and we get that the inductance of that coil is 0.2 henries, 200 millihenries, and that is that. That is all. That is the end of our very first and very short mini tutorial or recitation about magnetic circuits.